Thank you for joining us. I'm Ramona Schindelheim with WorkingNation. Just a brief introduction: Angela Jackson, Peter Callstrom, Congresswoman Sara Jacobs, and Sammy Totah. And I appreciate everybody being here. We're here to talk about the grand challenge of reskilling America. I think everybody probably saw the number this week that there are 10 million open jobs and not enough people to fill them. So some of the problems are out of our conversation, but some of them are about reskilling. And Angela and Peter got together and they were part of this grand challenge where they asked people to come up with innovative ways to rapidly reskill 25,000 people in this country. Not enough to fill those 10 million jobs, but it's a way to start creating a model that could be scaled up and shared around the country. And one of the things they did was activate local collaborations, one here in San Diego, and so we brought together those folks involved in that to talk about it so we can share some best practices. So Angela, I do want to start with you just to let's set the stage. What are we hoping to get from this collaboration?
Right, so I'm managing partner at New Profit. We launched the Future of Work Grand Challenge about a year ago in June of 2020. And at that time, we had been hearing from employer partners and other foundations that there is this skills gap. And so the question we asked ourselves is, how in this space, if you're a working adult, how do you upskill yourself? Where do you go to get upskilling? And one thing that we found was it wasn't very clear. And what we heard from working learners is that they did not want to go back and get a 4-year degree or get a master's degree because they had family obligations. So what we heard from them is that they wanted opportunities in short burst programs to gain a new skill that could be adjacent to a skill that they already have. So we cooked up this idea of creating this grand challenge where we would incentivize entrepreneurs who we think are creating the future of work, who are thinking about the new technologies, to think about how they train people in short burst programs. And my fellow traveler, Peter, who is here, it was back in 2019 when we started doing a visioneering event for this and really trying to understand what would need to be true if we were going to upskill and really try to transform how people are upskilled. We wanted to know who needed to be at the table. We thought workforce boards would be very central, and the reason for that is 1 in 12 US residents goes to their local workforce board or job center, American Job Center for Reskilling. And so what we wanted to make sure is that those innovations that we were surfacing, that we're actually deploying them in local communities with the people who need them the most. And so what we've tried to do, and you see this represented on the stage, is really bring all of the stakeholders together. So employers, our legislators, our workforce boards, our intermediaries and philanthropists who are helping to de-risk some of this training, and that created the Future of Work Grand Challenge.
And Peter, you have been doing this here in San Diego, so let's focus it on San Diego. Mm-hmm. You've been doing this for a long time. You're the CEO of the San Diego Workforce Board Partnership, mm-hmm. And you are already creating these programs. You already have these programs in place. Tell me how you're working in this challenge.
So in the country, there's 550 workforce boards. We're all wildly different in makeup and composition and how we do the work we do, how we're funded. And in the system, it's primarily funded by the federal government, and the federal government cannot do it all. Sara would like to, but we'll hear from her soon enough. But it just can't be done with a public dollar. And so credit to New Profit for really thinking creatively here about how do we leverage this system, build upon what we already have, which is a strong infrastructure of boards all over the country, and pair up with these entrepreneurs so that we can do rapid reskilling. So there were many applicants, and then the judging panel and narrowed it down to the picks, 6 boards across the country. And we work with 3 different entities who are deploying this work on a local basis. So we're working with the Last Mile, which you've profiled at WorkingNation, which is doing great reentry work and been very successful. And we're working with Somali Family Services that are training community health workers for refugees and immigrants, and that's gone very well. And also, of all things, in the apparel industry, and being able to have people train remotely for work in the garment industry. So again, I love it because it's taken risks. You have to do that if you're going to be able to train people quickly, affordably, and get them into careers that are sustainable, job quality, have a future, and are what people want. So we're very happy to be a part of this and to be able to experiment, because with the federal dollar, it can be tough because there's so many limitations and restrictions, and there's a difficulty with risk with the public dollar for good reasons. So having the private sector and philanthropy to be a part of this, to let us try and experiment and fail and relearn and redeploy, has been a real gift to our system.
You know, Sara, I'll get to you, Congresswoman. I'll get to you momentarily, but I want to ask Sammy. You are the CEO with Kaiser Permanente. You're a business. You're part of the business community. How are you working with this collaboration? How are you making this model work?
Thank you for the question. In addition being to the COO, I'm also the workforce development board chair and work closely with Peter. And for Kaiser Permanente in San Diego, and our mission really is around providing high quality, affordable health care and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. So what does that mean to improve the health of our communities? It's really about those social determinants of health, which includes education, which includes living wage jobs, which includes childcare, and some of those wraparound services. So we do try to lead in this space. We do a lot of things internally for our own workforce, where they do have access through Ben Hudnall Memorial Trust to upskill or reskill to move up the career ladder. We do have career counselors and coaches to help them along the way. And externally, we do provide health equity scholarships. We have active scholarship programs with the United Negro College Fund, with the Hispanic Scholarship Fund. We fund LISC to help with coaching and training and wraparound services. So we do quite a bit of grant work, and it's really part of our mission. So.
And I want to know, and Peter brought this up, that federal dollars can't do it all. You need this collaboration. You need every stakeholder to be a part of it. But what can the federal government, how can they help make this succeed?
Well, I think it's a really good question. So, there are some programs that the federal government just does and we need to continue doing. We just passed in the House a national apprenticeship bill that was written by my predecessor, Congresswoman Susan Davis. And we're right now, as Peter mentioned, working on this big reconciliation package that as of now will include $100 billion for workforce development for the kinds of industries that we know are going to be growing, which includes clean energy, it includes care work. And the other thing I think is important for government to do that I think we don't talk enough about in this context is actually the other side of this equation. So we talk a lot about what the fastest growing sectors are and how we skill people for them. But in a lot of those sectors that we know are growing and we know we're going to need a workforce, teachers, childcare providers, care workers, actually in many cases government is who is setting the wages, either through our reimbursement rates, through our education funding. And so making sure that we are understanding how important those sectors are to our economy and making sure that we're adequately valuing them so that when we are training people to go into those industries, they're actually good paying jobs on the other side is a really, really important part and one of the things I've really been focused on in Congress.
So one of the things is to make sure at the end of this, there are jobs on the end of it. So some of the groups that you have chosen to fund, you see them as jobs of the present, jobs of the future. Tell me about who you chose to fund here.
Yeah, so we have 15 finalists that we selected in partnering with MIT Solves and XPRIZE. And what we really wanted to do was find companies that were identifying training for jobs that weren't estimated to be automated in the next 3 to 5 years. So that's what we call the future. We know it's changing. But we also wanted trainings for jobs that were going to pay a living wage. And we we didn't want them to require a 4-year degree. You know, there's 70 million US residents who don't have a 4-year degree, and really thinking about how are they able to participate in the future of work. So I'll give you one example. There's a company, Charger Help, that we actually funded that's one of the finalists. They are training people to be electric car charging vehicle station technicians. And I talk about the future of work every day, and I remember when I saw their application, I was like, I didn't even know that job existed. And the funny thing is, it didn't. They created an ONET code so they could actually create that job, because the job that it fell under, the existing ONET code, required a 4-year degree. And the 2 women who founded the organization said this job doesn't. So they were able to create a new ONET code, which made this job and this opportunity eligible for anyone without a 4-year degree. So they're training people who used to be Lyft drivers, who used to be Uber drivers, and they're making upwards of $50 an hour. And that's an entry-level job when we think about the digital, new-collar jobs. This is like the start of that. And so those are the trainings that we wanted. Those were the types of innovators who are thinking about the training, but also thinking about how they democratize like these opportunities. And I'd say the last thing I would say about that is that it's also important for us that we are thinking about that 70 million. There's a lot of folks that are upskilling and retraining, but a lot of the trainings that exist out there, they're for folks who are in middle management, who have a 4-year degree, who might be able to get a credential so they can get a higher raise. What this challenge is about in this collaboration is taking people who weren't earning a living wage and giving them an actual opportunity to participate in all of the opportunities in the future of work.
You know, one thing, if I remember correctly too, that Charge Help, that was created because cars were being charged in the community, Inglewood, I think it was. So they were being charged there, but there was nobody there to repair the stations. So they created this idea and made a job out of it. I think that's fantastic local focus.
Yeah, and it's 2 women from the community, African-American women in Compton. They saw these charging stations popping up, and they're innovators, and they came up with an idea that's going to benefit them, but it's also going to benefit the community, which I think is the other exciting part of it, is that all of the companies that we have funded as part of this Future Work Grand Challenge, you can see them on newprofit.org. You will see they all have that workforce development piece, and they're all excited about innovating in this public system. And I'll end with this. One thing we found, New Profit has been around 22 years. We've been funding entrepreneurs. Last year, we surveyed all of the entrepreneurs in our portfolio, and only 4% of their funding came from government funding. And as the Congresswoman said, there's going to be unprecedented public dollars. We want to make sure that the most innovative entrepreneurs who have outcomes that are attached to jobs are able to access those funds.
So anybody want to say anything else about that?
What's so amazing about New Profit leaning in on this work too is the workforce board system is here, but by nature of who we are and how we're funded in the core work of career center funding and getting dollars out to the community, we wouldn't naturally partner with the Charger Help or any number of these organizations because it's there but really outside of the kind of the core work again. So by them having the vision to bridge this and make it work and to figure out how to pair up, it can be a real game changer for our industry because we need to be able to expand further beyond the core work. And it's hard to do, but it's doable. And that impetus for New Profit to take a chance on all of us and bring us together is going to lead to more and more innovation down the road that's going to allow us to rapidly reskill people so they can get into great careers without student debt, without more delay, and to be able to do it while you're a working learner or a parent, and to be able to get into the workforce because employers desperately need workers. And if we can get people skilled up so they can step in and add value on day one, that is a game changer.
You know, Congresswoman, we were talking about this, and you just brought it up. Working parents, working mothers, working fathers, they need this reskilling to get back in the workforce. But one of the things that we've talked about in the conversation before is wraparound services and how you can provide those to the people that need the skilling the most.
Yeah, look, I think the pandemic has really shown how important things like childcare are to our labor force. We know that women have been pushed out of the labor market in huge droves. We're back to, I think, the levels we were at in the 1980s. And if we don't do something to address that, it's going to be a real problem for the future of our economy. not only for it being unequitable and morally wrong, but also because if we're going to compete on the global scale, we need all of the human capital potential that we have in our country to be working at its highest potential. And if we have half our labor force out because they are watching kids at home, that's not good for our economy. And so I think as we look ahead at what the future of work really looks like, I think childcare in particular plays an important role, and it plays 3 different parts of the component. So the first is that we know we need to do a better job of teaching kids what skills they're going to need for the future, and that starts with early childhood education. We know how important those early 0 to 5 years are, how important the after-school programs can be when they're school age, and so that's a big component of our future workforce. Then we know families need someone to watch their kids while they're working. And lastly, childcare work is actually a huge opportunity for more work, especially for women and women of color who right now are the predominant workforce and small business owners in that industry. And that is a crucial component because, well, actually, Peter's organization did a study of childcare here in San Diego, and over 40% of San Diego families couldn't find childcare that met their needs before the pandemic. I think it's something like 66% now, and over 500 childcare centers and operators in San Diego County have closed since the pandemic started. And so we have this gap of people who need childcare. We have a lot of folks who can provide childcare, but you need government to come in to make that market work because of licensing, because you need the small sizes. But even when we think about the kind of people we want to help, parents who are home watching their own kid, if they could take in 1 or 2 neighbor kids, get paid for that, have that be a service they provide their neighbors, and also a way for them to make an income and provide quality childcare to their own kid and a few others, that's good for all of us. So how do we start looking at this childcare component as a solution from all 3 of those fronts, and not just as a thing we think about on the side, and then upskilling is about teaching people how to code?
Sammy, go ahead.
I couldn't agree with Congresswoman more. From an employer perspective, it is our number 1 issue is affordable childcare that's close to home. The other piece that I would throw in there is it's specifically for the San Diego market, affordable housing. We have employees that are driving 2.5 hours to come to work at Kaiser Permanente. With childcare, that's just not a sustainable long-term model. And when we talk about upskilling and reskilling, we have people in our community that we can train to work that already live here, that already have a place to live. And so, again, it just emphasizes the focusing on our community locally. So.
Yeah,
I was just
go
going to
ahead.
say, you talked about the social determinants of health, and a lot of times I talk about the social determinants of work, like what really comes first, right? So if you have a living wage, you can go get health care, you can find transportation, and I think starting at the key of that and just being really honest about what it takes for someone to be employed, I think is really critical, because it didn't work for a lot of women before, right? I said, if women who were making 6 figures got kicked out of the workforce, what do you think the people who are making $15 an hour are doing before? Like, it just wasn't working. And what we've tried to do with this challenge is really to think about that worker who wants to upskill holistically. So a lot of the solutions that we funded, they're not just focused on their training. They're also thinking about transportation. They're also thinking about credits for childcare, so that that person, that job seeker, can actually be in the mindset to upskill and has all of the other conditions met.
We have business, we have government, we have local workforce, and we have philanthropy, all coming together to talk about this issue. Used a phrase that I thought was interesting, a radical collaboration. That doesn't seem radical to me. What's the radical part of this?
I think the part of it is, and I was just talking to another workforce board, we all came with the agenda to get folks back to work. So there wasn't any ego there. It wasn't about who can take credit. It was like, how do we get this done? We may succeed, we may fail, but we're hopefully going to learn along the way. And so that type of leaning in, you need this type of ecosystem because I tell people one foundation can't solve this problem. I don't care how large the foundation is. One employer is not going to solve this problem, but it is going to take this radical collaboration. We call it across strange bedfellows almost. A lot of us just like work in our sectors and our silos. Like we have to see past what is my job to do. I'm a funder, so like what I'm supposed to do is just give grants out, but I want them to be effective grants. So like part of my job is making sure this collaboration, and that's work that's necessary. So how do you collaborate, look at work that may not be exactly in your wheelhouse and maybe stretch a bit so you can actually have that collaboration together?
Is there, Peter, you talked about like the last mile. This is tapping into a workforce that may be left out. There may be a barrier. These are people criminally, touched by the criminal justice system, formerly incarcerated. How is that, how do you see that work fitting into this challenge?
Yeah, there's something like 7 million people who are incarcerated in our country. Something like that makes up 25% of the world's incarceration. It's a tragedy. And people, when they serve their time, need the support in order to stay out. Unfortunately, recidivism is in the neighborhood of 50 to 70%. That's horrible. And if we can't fix that, we're going to have the worst revolving door of all time. The Last Mile has proven through their intervention, they brought recidivism down in some cases to zero with the people they're serving. That's remarkable. And we've been doing reentry out of 2 jails in San Diego, Otay Mesa, and then Las Colinas for 7 years now with a DOL grant years ago that got us off the ground and now funded through the Sheriff's Department. And we've seen recidivism go down to the low teens. So that's like the best investment you could ever make. And the more we can do it, the more we can refine it and work with Last Mile and expand it so that everybody is served before they're released and with the supports necessary to make it. So it is an incredible investment, and we've got to fix this incarceration tragedy that we have. And it's doable, it's fixable, and people need the support though, because if you come out and you've got a record and then you're supposed to find a job on your own, and in this market, good luck. But if the supports are there and it's not costly, we can change lives and communities. I would like to go back to the Congresswoman about the infrastructure bill, because this is historic, what's going on. The $1 trillion passage, thank you, and now the reconciliation, and if that goes through, we'll have, and I'd love you to speak to the care part of it too, because there's the $100 billion that the Congresswoman mentioned. Comparably, that's going to be like 10-year investment, a transformational opportunity for our country to, again, rapidly reskill, build off of what Angela's doing from what we've learned. So the timing is so good to be able to take that and make that grow with more federal investment. But I'd love to hear more about what you see as an outlook on that, because this is as big as FDR's New Deal and hopefully with the Green Deal and all the other opportunities ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed the Senate. We still have not passed it through the House. We just found out today we'll be going back on the last week of August to do some voting. So you heard it here first. And they're now starting on the budget reconciliation, which will be likely in the realm of $3.5 trillion, which will include hopefully $100 billion for this workforce development. Right now the number is $425 billion for a combination of universal pre-K and child care, and a number of other really exciting things.
And those are all new dollars, like the pre-K and universal piece. What does that mean comparably to what we have now? Yeah,
so right now on Head Start, I think we spend $30 billion. So this will be $425 billion. And it will be we're still working out the details, but some combination of plussing up Head Start plus some child care development CCDBGs, child care development block grants, plus some support to school districts to do the universal pre-K that has already been piloted in some school districts across the country. And so I think it's a really exciting opportunity. I'm also really honored that the Speaker Pelosi appointed me to the newly created Select Committee on Economic Disparity and Fairness and Growth. It's a new committee created based on the committee FDR created during the Great Depression to figure out what to do to get out of the Depression. There are 8 Democrats, so it was a real honor to be appointed. And my purview in the committee, each of us got like a, I don't know, I joke, it's like
stake in the ground.
Yeah, no, I joke it's like a Real Housewives line. Each of us got a thing, and mine is the future of work. And so really what I'm gonna be looking at is, as we pass this reconciliation bill, as we're working on this infrastructure deal, we're trying to address the things that created the inequality that we see now. But looking ahead, what will create inequality might not necessarily be the same thing, and it's very tied to this question of the future of work. And so how do we make sure we're also putting in place protections right now so that we don't, in 20 years, get to the same place we are now because we fixed how we got here but weren't looking ahead?
So looking not just at today, but looking truly to the future and what you need to address. And Sammy, I just want to talk as a business person from a big company. What are you looking for out of this collaboration?
Well, I mean, I think that in terms of the collaboration, you're looking for folks that are skilled in the jobs that we are going to need. But by the same token, I think employers have a responsibility to intentionally hire from an equitable and an inclusive fashion. And so we have underserved communities in San Diego. We have to skill and reach out to those communities and bring them in, get them in the pipeline so they have an opportunity to continue to grow, develop, and move up the career ladder. And I don't think that that's possible unless the employers step in and do their part.
I'd actually like to build on that really quickly because I think this is a crucial point. I think we spend a lot of time talking about the skills gap. And in some ways, that puts the burden on the employee yourself, that there's something wrong with you, that you don't have a job, or that you're not in the right industry. But actually, as we looked at the labor market in 2019 and 2018, we actually saw that as the labor market got tighter, as our economy grew and got better, we actually saw that businesses were willing to take on more of that skilling work themselves, that they were opening jobs to formerly incarcerated people, to people who otherwise wouldn't necessarily be desirable hires necessarily, because it was a tight labor market and they needed the workers. And so I think it's important that as we're thinking about upskilling, we are doing it understanding that there are going to be small businesses and these kinds of industries that are predominated by small businesses that are going to need government and philanthropy to do the kind of training work for them because they'll never have that kind of huge scale to be able to do it. But also that we're not taking that burden off of employers of training their own workforce and being open to hiring all sorts of people and making sure that while we're doing policy, we are trying to keep our unemployment levels low and tighten the labor market so that there is an incentive for businesses to do that.
And the thing that I think about, and you named the skills gap, the number of unfilled jobs, how does a regular person find out about these jobs? And that's the other thing that we're concerned about. Like, I remember the big thing a couple months ago were contract tracers, and some people were able to get those jobs. Those jobs paid a good wage, but how does one get on a pathway to find out these? And I think that's where the collaboration with the boards and employers are really important because the employers, they're starting to estimate what they'll need in the future. But if you're a working learner, you're parenting, where do you go to get that information? And so what we're thinking about and working with Peter and working with the boards, how do we modernize that system? How do we think about solving for the information asymmetry, right? So that people understand what does it take to get into one of those unfilled jobs? And what we want to invest in is innovators and entrepreneurs who are solving for that piece, again, for the 70 million who don't have a 4-year degree. And ultimately, it's going to be for all of us. Like, I don't know if you heard, the first person who's estimated to live to be 150 has already been born. So we're all going to go through multiple job transitions. And so if we think about solving these issues for the people at the margins, it's going to help all of us at the end of the day.
If I may, real quick about the skills gap, it starts with an awareness and opportunity gap. If kids aren't exposed to careers and it's not part of the language throughout K through 12 and you're then done, if you even get through K through 12, then people struggle. Many are lost because they don't even know what's out there. And so it starts there, and then you don't even have the opportunity if you're born into a certain zip code. You have already barriers to being able to even get the skills necessary to get the job. So we've got to get in earlier. We're doing that in our work and with other partners. And just raising awareness. WorkingNation, you guys do great work of sharing the word so that people really understand the crisis we're in, but there's ways out. But it starts with awareness, because it's awareness, opportunity, and then the skills gap. And that's why we have this crisis of so many open jobs that can't be filled because people don't have the skills because they didn't acquire them earlier on. So we got to do a better job of being able to equip people with that early.
Go ahead, Sammy.
I was going to say, even once we identify the skills, the transition from having the skills to getting the job is still pretty messy, as we look at it. And so anything that we can do to help streamline that and, make the connection. So we're looking at the whole continuum from training all the way to not only getting the job, but checking in with them 1 and 2 years later to make sure that they're thriving in that position.
I don't mean this as a curveball, but you talked about K through 12 and younger adults in that. More than half of the long-term unemployed people in this country are over the age of 45. And many of those need some type of maybe upskilling, reskilling, refreshing of their skills. But they are closed, they're not being considered when they walk in a door. They don't fit in culturally, or they are not considered tech savvy, But so what do we do about that group of people? How do we get them into this mix?
I think, first of all, we are experiencing in this moment in time a very tight labor market. So we are seeing employers slightly begin to change their practices and looking at, I'd say, non-traditional candidates. While that door is kind of open, I'm hoping that we can push it wider to get more folks in. And I think it's going to be employers like Kaiser who take a leadership position in saying, you know what, we're going to ban the 4-year degree. Like, we're going to really do an audit of all the jobs we have available and make sure if we're saying a degree is required, then it's definitely that. It's going to take employers and partners who are making these pathways a bit more transparent and really understanding that if you're a working learner, you may not have the monetary resources or the time resources to go back. And so really being thoughtful about how do we engage that person where they are. So it's screening them in versus screening them out.
And I think in the end, as workforce boards, we need to be very flexible. That's really hard in our work, but can be done. And you need to be able to offer an array of different training programs so that people can access what they want to do and inform them well so they know exactly what they're getting into, if it's free or if it's at cost, and what that income potential can be. It's informed choice, and oftentimes that's not done very well. And so through New Profit, being able to offer another array of ways for people to be served, that adds to what we can do to serve our community. So we need more options, because the career center services, the one-stops that are traditional in our field, serve a lot of people well who are able to come in, find that next job and move on, or do some training and move on to the next career. But that doesn't work for a lot of people. So we've got to be more creative. And again, what New Profit is doing, great test bed, and then as more funds come from the federal government, we can hopefully really expand upon what we've learned and do this at scale, which is the vision of New Profit, to rapidly reskill 25,000 people. That's awesome, but let's make it 50,000, 100,000, and many more, with really proven models that don't burden people with student debt, don't set them down a path that isn't going to be fulfilling for them. So we've just got to do better to offer a lot of different options.
Yeah, I have 2 points I want to make on this, but first I couldn't pass up the opportunity to say that even people who go to 4-year college should not be saddled with student debt. Yes. Yeah. That's for another conversation. So I think there are 2 things to say about this. I think, one, we also need to acknowledge that some of those older workers who are leaving the workforce because their industry no longer exists are not going to be reskilled. You're not necessarily going to turn a coal miner into a solar panel technician. It might not be possible for a 65-year-old. And so what do we as a community have a responsibility to do to make sure that those folks are able to still thrive given how much they did work and contribute to our economy. I think it's important for us to think about that. I think the second piece is also, and I hate to be a broken record, but care work. Because a lot of those 45-year-olds maybe are taking care of their parents, just not as a full-time job. Maybe are watching their grandkids, just not as a paid position. And there was some study done of folks in Germany, I think, that their retirement age is 65, and like they were unemployed from 55 to 65 and horribly depressed. And as soon as they turned 65 and could tell people they were retired, all of a sudden, like they didn't get any extra benefits. All of a sudden, they were much happier in this study. And so it's also a question of reimagining and revaluing what we consider work and what we consider a valued part of our economy. And I would say a bunch of those 45-year-olds who are watching their grandkids and taking care of their aging parents, we need those workers. And so how do we make those be valued parts of our economy so that it's not like a thing you have to do if you have no other options, but actually kind of an honor to care for your family and care for your community.
Okay, so what is the next step? What are you looking to bring out of this? I know part of it is to create a model that you can scale up. So how are you going to do this?
Yeah, so the first thing that we're doing is our goal is to rapidly reskill 25,000 U.S. residents, and we will do that in the next year. And we're actually on track to meet that number. And some of the teams who've been doing recruiting, they really use some innovative practices. For example, in Massachusetts, we sent out the notice about the trainings to everyone who was unemployed and people who didn't have a 4-year degree, to 20,000 people. 8,000 responded. And so what that evidence to me was like people actually do want to be trained when they know that there's a job at the end with a living wage, right? So they knew these were good jobs. So one, we want to do that. Two is once we have a model of what works, we're looking to expand that nationally. So we're working with 6 communities now. We're going to add on 10 communities. And then our North Star is working with our legislators on passing legislation and making sure that these dollars that are going to be put out, that they're going to organizations, entrepreneurs who are actually doing the work and have outcomes of not only just training people, but actually placing them in jobs with living wages, because that's what people want.
And so kind of going down the line before, as we wrap up here, we only have a few more minutes. So Sammy, what message do you want others out there thinking about this issue to come away from this collaboration with?
It's a system, right? And so it takes all the sectors working together. It really does, and everyone has to do their part. I think as an employer, we try to do our part. We try to lead by example, but like you said, we could do something, but we can't fix it. It's gonna require a massive effort by a lot of folks. I will kind of give a quick plug on the healthcare sector, because I do think we're heading straight into a mental health crisis in healthcare. What our healthcare workers have gone through the last 18 to 24 months, you can't even imagine unless you're in it. I mean, they've taken more dead bodies than they have their whole 30-year career down to the morgue. So we're gonna have a real problem when we're starting to see the beginning of that right now.
And Congresswoman?
Yeah, I think if I could, have one message, it's to reimagine what work really means and what upskilling means and what up means. Because there are so many opportunities in creativity and care, in healthcare, that we know are going to need to be filled. And so how do we make sure that those are the good paying jobs? How do we make sure that they are the honored jobs so that people want to go into them and don't feel like it's a burden to go into them, but actually are honored to play that really important role in our economy?
And Peter?
I would really love to see our workforce board system really embrace being innovators and risk takers and not be afraid to fail and have it be messy and uncomfortable as you're trying out new things. I think it's, by nature, it can become very bureaucratic, and it's so easy to say no to the different things. And we're a culture where it's, yes, let's give that a go, unless it's completely out of bounds, but let's do it. We need to make impact, and we can with more partners. Partners want to work with entities that can deliver, that can convene, that can really message and get the word out and serve people in meaningful ways. So I want our system to really get uncomfortable with that and innovate and stretch, and then we can partner with great partners like New Profit.
And Angela, you get the last word.
So I'm going to go back to the workforce boards too, but since I'm here at ASU+GSV, we need our innovators to think about our public systems. We need our innovators to think about the American Job Centers and the Career One-Stops, because if we focus on folks who are already employed, a lot of them are taken care of. A lot of times what I'm hearing from entrepreneurs is they're not going to public systems because maybe it's a bit opaque on how you receive a contract, maybe it takes a little bit longer. I just implore you, because when we think about those 70 million or that 1 in 12 residents, they need the trainings that are being created here. You know, the panel before this was on VR and AR. Like, amazing things are happening in that realm with training that people are doing via distance. We can bring them and deploy them to thousands, hundreds of thousands of people through this workforce system.
I want to thank this lovely panel for these lovely thoughts. So thank everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.